Welcome to Ideagen TV. Today we are thrilled to have with us Evan Harvey, Global Head of Sustainability at the Nasdaq. Evan, welcome.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
You know, Evan, it's super exciting to be having this conversation with you, especially at this moment. As we look back just a few short months ago, January, we were looking at this runway. We saw the runway to 2030, and who could have imagined that a few short months later, here we are in the midst of a global pandemic, but yet there are signs of innovation taking place. There are signs of impact, both now and in the future. And what's exciting about this conversation is the Nasdaq has been a leader. I love your tagline of "Rewrite Tomorrow," because rewrite tomorrow means a lot of things, but I think what I think it means is the Nasdaq has had this uncanny ability to see around corners, to be innovative, to be really, sort of cutting edge in developing partnerships and all the impact that you've done. And so as we lead into this conversation, I'd love to lead with that framework for conversation and ask you if you could kindly let our global audience listening today, if you could let them know a little bit about yourself, as well as your incredible professional career.
Well, thank you very much. I like to think that we look around corners also. So my role is as the Global Head of Sustainability at Nasdaq. So that has a couple of different functions within the organization. Internally, everything we do as a sort of corporate reporting entity, our strategy and management of ESG issues and sustainability issues. Externally, working with listed companies on the exchange to make them better in this way. I also have a hand in our corporate philanthropy program and our volunteerism program. So I've been with the exchange for 15 years, in this role for about 10. And in addition to all the work that I get to do via the exchange, we are connected to a number of different ecosystems because of who we are. So the industry, the trade association that manages stock exchanges, the World Federation of Exchanges, I've been part of metrics development efforts there, trying to get a common sense disclosure protocol going for public companies around the world on ESG. I've been part of the United Nations in a variety of ways through the UN Global Compact Board in the US and also the Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative, looking at global effort to create more understanding and data transparency around ESG. And then working with more recent efforts like the Sustainable Development Goals and other reporting groups like the GRI and SASB. So we work this problem from all angles, from the listed company side, from the quasi-regulatory side, from the market maker side. Nasdaq, the opportunity of working at Nasdaq puts us into all of those conversations. And so that's it's been a terrific ride for the last 10 years. And I'm really anxious to see how much more good we can do.
Well, so interesting, for the past 10 years. And when you look at the next 10 years, what an exciting opportunity really to help with the Nasdaq leading the way in what you described, which is really a cross-sector leadership role that the Nasdaq has. And I think those insights are incredibly valuable. And it's sort of like what I've been referring to recently as dynamic resiliency. A lot of the organizations that have survived and maybe even thrived throughout arguably one of the most difficult periods in human history, with the entire planet facing this hidden enemy, are thriving because they had in their DNA, in their ethos, in their strategy, embedded in their strategy, the importance of partnerships. That importance of being able to understand the capacity of other organizations, so that now we end up in this situation and you can say, well, I know that organization can do this, let's partner. I know what your capabilities are. That is dynamic resiliency. And so you've had this incredible career thus far. What do you see as the best approach in helping to achieve those 17 global goals of the United Nations, and in particular, Goal 17, which we just alluded to, which is global partnerships?
I have a few thoughts on that. I think that I mean, the number one reason would be because we're on the clock and we don't really have much choice. I think that these are problems that need to be solved because they are potentially existential, not just for business, but for the planet. So I do take that seriously. NASDAQ takes it seriously. I agree with your premise, though, that everything in the COVID social justice crisis era that we've been living with for most of 2020 is an era of real-time response and dynamic engagement. The idea around dynamic capitalism or stakeholder capitalism, more parties, more voices in the conversation, has been accelerated over the last several months. But I think there are three things that are going to drive progress really towards the 2030 goals. And I've always been a big believer that number one is the data set. We need to be able to measure these things and we need to be able to report them properly so that investors and other drivers of the ecosystem can actually make decisions with the right information. So whether you are able to measure development and progress towards the goals, that is an open question. How individual companies can mesh their performance with other companies, with industries, with sectors, with countries, and report that properly and expose it publicly, because I'm a big believer that transparency is a value add here, that the more you know about performance and the more you know about where companies and other stakeholders are going, the more you can hold them accountable for falling short or praise them for going long. And then last but not least, goal setting, public goal setting in particular, is a vital tool here too. Put yourself on record, say you were going to make this progress on carbon, this progress on hunger, this progress on women's health issues, and then measure it and report publicly about how the effort is going. Too often in the past, there's been a stigma on negative performance. The idea that you might fall short means that you don't say anything. And I think that the field has generally moved to a different position on this, which is make your best effort. Put an idea or a goal out there that is meaningful and ambitious, and report about all of the things that help you get to that goal or hold you back from getting there.
Tremendous perspective, Evan. And, as we look at this, how do you in the NASDAQ measure this progress towards ESG sustainability as we're on this runway to 2030?
I keep going back to data, not to sound like a broken record, but there are a certain number of metrics. One of the issues that companies in particular, public companies in the US, but elsewhere, have struggled with are the overlapping reporting structures and standard setters and protocols that are out there for measuring ESG performance. So I think we do need to come to some harmonized understanding of the metrics that actually drive progress, whether that is contributing directly to a specific outcome or contributing to the sustainable development goals and those planetary problems generally. But I think that in addition to metrics, we need to talk about investment. Dollars create impact. Not that everything is fixed with a checkbook, but dollar investment into sustainable capital formation, into products and services that are building the planet up and creating more resilience to climate and other things, rather than investing in technologies that are going in the opposite direction. I think that's an important driver as we move towards 2030. And then I think that we need to look at the number of institutions and voices that are in the SDG process, in the sustainable finance process. This is a very big market. It's not a market that forces you to choose between returns and doing good, as some people would have you believe. Depending on who you talk to, this is either a $12 trillion market or a $31 trillion market. And those labels get a little bit fuzzy, but it's still trillions. There's a lot of money to be made here. So we need to leverage the business voices and the economic interests of people that want to do good with their money and steer it into these development patterns that support the SDGs, rather than short-term and short-sighted efforts to capitalize on a crisis rather than fixing a crisis.
That's right. And as you know, Evan, Microsoft presents Ideagen globally, and we're so proud. First of all, they're also NASDAQ listed, so this conversation has a connectivity to that. But in terms of a company like Microsoft, they're doubling down, right? Carbon neutral, all AI, cloud, all the incredible things they're doing, and including accessibility. I mean, they're truly, with Satya Nadella's leadership and Tony Towns-Whitley and Kate Johnson and Gretchen O'Hara and everyone over there that we know and admire. I mean, they're doing incredible work, and they're a great model for other companies, emerging companies, that say, how do we begin, right? Where do we begin with this? And so as you're looking at this, how do you see technology specifically playing a role in ESG and sustainability, and how has the Nasdaq been using technology?
Well, and I take your point completely about Microsoft. I don't just have to agree with you because they're a sponsor. I agree with you because they are absolutely a global leader in this space. And others listed on Nasdaq in the technology space, like Intel and Google and other places, are doing amazing things too. I think that one of the reasons tech companies excel at this is because the DNA of the company is built on innovation, engineering, and efficiency. They always look for ways to be more efficient in their process, in the expenditure of energy, the expenditure of resources. They're trying to leverage technology, essentially a machine, which is always cheaper than a human, to do some of the work that humans can't do at scale. So there's a reason why technology companies are all in on, and creating progress on ESG, maybe more so than other companies where that discipline is a little bit further afield. I think that in terms of the data story that I've been harping on since the beginning of this conversation, technology companies have been leading there too, because they believe in measurement. They believe that you can't manage what you can't measure, and they take that to heart. They often are striving for real-time data measurement, and they use data to make their decisions. There's less of an impulse, I think, in that community to shoot from the hip and go with a gut feeling rather than rely on the data, the feedback, the numbers. And so I think that's actually driving progress forward in a very efficient way. And there's probably something cultural about those firms too that is helping us move forward. A spirit of innovation, access, instant participation in serious projects, new voices, diversity of new voices. Technology firms, have some work to do in terms of general cultural diversity. But I think that diversity of ideas and being able to listen to and cultivate an idea that is going to disrupt an industry is something that has been a virtue there for a long time.
What incredible insights, truly remarkable. And you stand right at the nexus of this at the Nasdaq. And to further that, so each year, every 2 years rather, you and the Nasdaq, you issue this reporting guide. What can we expect in the ESG Nasdaq report, which is expected to be released again in 2021?
Well, clearly, we're going to have to wrestle with the last 9 months. We're going to have to wrestle with the difficulties of measuring the S of ESG. And I know that we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, but I think that's something that we'll have to take up, because in the 2017 version and the 2019 version, we didn't anticipate this kind of social disruption happening this fast. I mean, it might have been something that we have seen coming on the horizon as global resources dry up, or as the political situation or social situation or economic situation for certain audiences fails them. So we did not really prepare the guide to incorporate these kinds of dynamics, and we will certainly have to take it up in next year's version. There also have been a number of new or new-ish reporting structures that have come to light that we would take into account in a grander way than we have before. So things like the TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. These are newer efforts that are asking fundamentally interesting, difficult, and insightful questions of public companies and investors. And I think it's forced the conversation into a more practical realm than where we were before. So we will have to wrestle with the implications of those standards as they have become more popular in the last few years. Those are the two things that I think come immediately to mind for the next version.
Well, that's super exciting, and we'll be looking forward to that report in 2021. I'm sure as a look back and as a look forward, it will be an incredibly insightful read, for sure. So we're looking forward to that.
We try to make it short and readable. So it might sound like a stale document, but we try to make it as exciting as possible.
That's fantastic. So it's a usable document. I love that.
It absolutely is.
And so, as you know, at Ideagen, we're focused and have been focused on the whole notion of cross-sector collaboration and innovation. And we believe strongly that a lot of the solutions to the world's most vexing issues oftentimes come from that cross-sector collaboration, because we also believe that no one entity can do it on its own. And we're seeing more and more, companies, NGOs, and even the public sector, the United Nations saying, well, we need business at the table, or we need, NGOs at the table. No one entity can do it alone. So why, Evan, is cross-sector collaboration and innovation so vital, in your belief, to helping to solve so many of the world's most vexing issues? And to go a step further, how do you infuse that collaboration and innovation into your daily mission to successfully achieve your goals at the Nasdaq?
It's a great question, and I think that it was developing naturally on its own course as business has evolved and as the capital markets have evolved, and I think everything has been accelerated by the crisis over the last 9 months. So there's a couple of reasons for it. One is the rise in power of those diverse voices. In the past, companies may have had, or businesses or investors or whatever power structure you might think of, might have had the wherewithal and the capital to do what they want in service of profits or in service of some of their goal. And the integration of diverse voices, the integration of other stakeholders into that decision-making process, there might have been less incentive to do so. And I think that has totally changed. Now, there are a number of stakeholders that are part of just about every public company process as we go forward, not just via NASDAQ and via the IPO process or capital markets or capital raising, but also just in terms of corporate services, in terms of regulatory reporting, in terms of talent acquisition and recruiting, in terms of cultivating, making a culture that is productive, more productive than not in-house. These are all things that require the integration of diverse voices, diverse points of view in order to be successful. So I think that dynamic was happening already, and I think it's been accelerated by what's been happening lately, because the underrepresentation of certain audiences and certain stakeholders has been brought into sharp focus by things that have been happening. It's one of the reasons why NASDAQ is relaunching a new campaign on purpose. We believe that purpose is a great sort of universal understanding of how we can leverage the power of capital markets, the power of NASDAQ, the power of our educational foundation, and other things in order to include those voices and to bring diverse decision makers into the capital raising and wealth creation process. So it's one of the reasons why we have launched that initiative in the last few weeks, and it's really based on two main goals. One is sort of reimagining investor education to bring underrepresented audiences into the process and help with their access to the wealth creation engine that is the capital market. And then also diversifying entrepreneurship, bringing more diverse business opportunities and business leaders to market via the power of the entrepreneurial side of NASDAQ. So, so we're looking at, and that aligns perfectly with your question, because you can't talk about purpose being the corporate voice on the mountaintop, sending that out there into the universe. You need to have other people that support that mission, modify that mission, and help steer you in the right direction. So I think that cross-sector collaboration in that sense is something that we've always bought into. And you mentioned some of the companies that listed on NASDAQ, 30, 40, 50 years ago. We were their only choice. There wasn't a lot, there were very few open doors for them. And the fact that they are now the largest companies in the world by far, the Microsofts and Googles and Apples of the world, I think only adds weight to your theory that access, diverse voice participation, cross-sector collaboration, finding that open door, finding that open mind is essential to business success where it is today. Profound
insights, and so incredibly proud to be, working with NASDAQ and Microsoft and other companies, NGOs, public sector, on these conversations, because I think it's so important for folks to know, our audience to know across the planet, that companies, organizations, entities like the NASDAQ are really making it a point to not just talk about these issues, but really to help lead and affect and impact change. And that's what you're describing. I think the series you're launching and launched on purpose, that's phenomenal. And reimagining, you know what it takes. You can imagine it because you see what entrepreneurial success looks like. And then you can, of course, then reimagine it. You can't reimagine something if you haven't seen it before. And so right. You're leading because of that, because you're dealing with these entrepreneurs, you're dealing with these emerging companies, and you're dealing with the existing companies on the NASDAQ. So you've got that mix of the emergence You've got the mix of know-how, the talent, and the knowledge combined with innovation. My gosh, is that powerful. And so I'd like to shift. So we've heard a lot about the Nasdaq. Incredible work that's happening with global leaders like yourself, Evan. And leaders set the tone. So leadership is critically important. I'd like to ask you, though, specifically, what has been one or more of your most favorite, rewarding experiences as global head of sustainability for the Nasdaq?
Well, when we discussed this previously, a couple of things really jumped out to me. One would be we started a donation matching platform and a volunteerism platform in-house that we didn't really have before. And we were trying to find ways to grow this with very few resources and with not a lot of money, and to try to create employee engagement. Nasdaq is a big brand with a fairly small footprint, about 5,000 employees. And so we were trying to create a program that resonated with them and was personal for them. And so rather than create a volunteerism program or a philanthropy program that was focused on a few small pillars. We're going to work on education. We're going to work on health awareness. We're going to work on women's issues. We basically allowed the employees to support any cause, as long as it was a 501c3 IRS recognized charity, any cause that they wanted to. And we would match their donation, and we would help them create volunteering efforts for them or for teams at Nasdaq with that charitable partner. So they could be hyper local. They could do local community stuff. They could do stuff with their kids' schools. They could do stuff with their a health issue that's particularly important to them, with their alumni association. We just thought it was the smartest way to grow a grassroots program, and it took off like crazy. And we get more attention for the empowerment that we brought to our employees through that program than we do through some of the bigger stuff that we do, the large-scale donation management that we do, which has tremendous impact and has had impact lately. But in terms of rank and file employees and touching their lives personally, I think that allowing them to make their own decisions as adults and say, I'm going to use my money to support this cause, and I want Nasdaq to support me in doing so, and giving them time off to volunteer there too, has been tremendously rewarding. And the fact that it took off so quickly and has touched so many people is a boon to my daily work. The other thing that comes to mind is taking the scale one step beyond Nasdaq. So some of the ideas that we had early on, working with a couple of working groups at the Trade Association, at the United Nations, around sustainable development before the SDGs were announced. We recognized that we were part of an ecosystem as a stock exchange that could drive real good. It could drive capital in the right directions, could better inform investors about what companies could provide, could better prepare companies for the scrutiny that was coming on sustainability performance. Those ideas over a couple of years gained a lot of attention, and those working groups became part and parcel of what the UN was doing. And so I was very happy a few years ago to see my CEO, Adina Friedman, address the General Assembly of the UN and talk about some of these issues in a huge room with a lot of pomp and circumstance. So it was fascinating and satisfying to see a small idea in an exchange or in a community that grew to the point where it had that kind of podium and that kind of presence. And I knew then that we weren't just whistling in the wind, that we were espousing ideas that had value in the marketplace and that people would engage with, agree with them or disagree with them, but they would engage with.
Such incredible points, and I'm glad you mentioned your leadership. Adina Friedman, CEO of the Nasdaq, what an incredible leader, leading the way, trailblazing, having led the Nasdaq now for several years, and changing the game. And that empathy and the commitment to purpose is evident in every single thing you're doing at the Nasdaq, which is incredibly remarkable. Switching gears slightly, Evan, in your opinion, how is the world today different than pre-pandemic?
We could spend an hour on that alone. In terms of my business and my job, a few things come to mind, and I think I've mentioned these previously. One would be immediate sharp focus on the social part of ESG. ESG is environmental, social, and governance performance. It tends to involve a lot of different performance metrics, but focusing very sharply over the last several months on social performance. So that means how are companies engaging with communities? How are companies engaging with different audiences? How are they promoting an atmosphere of diversity, inclusion, and belonging, both within their buildings and also in the communities or the circles where they have influence, and the money that they lend and the projects that get greenlighted. How are they taking those diverse voices into account? There's been a lot of scrutiny immediately upon that for those companies, for large and small companies, because sometimes we think of this as only a Microsoft issue or only a Google issue with the deep pockets that can solve it, but smaller companies are part of the supply chain for those larger companies, and they can often do a little bit of good in a small way that contributes up the ladder. So I think that that's been the first thing that I've seen in terms of a total difference over the last 9 months, that we used to say in the S part of ESG that it's the most difficult part to measure, because how do you measure the value of a human right? How do you measure the impact of a diversity program? How do you measure the drop off in percentages between men and women, from entry level to board level? And what's the impact on the company? Can you tie that to a dollar amount? But that work has to happen. We have to have that understanding in order to drive progress. So I think that has been the most obvious change. I think you're seeing more willingness from companies, engage CEOs, certainly, and boards, but companies also to be public and to espouse their views and to talk about their ethics and their community engagement in a way that they hadn't before. Companies attempted to remain apolitical or asocial in a lot of ways, or and to varying degrees of success. And I think that there is pressure from within and pressure from without to be more on the record on some of these issues. Right is right as far as that company believes. And if they are pursuing profits with purpose, then they are moving in the right direction and they are keeping their culture healthy. And if they are not, then essentially that's a short-term goal that will not pan out. And then I think that, we had seen the shift towards this stakeholder capitalism, this expansion of the audiences that companies should consider as they make strategy and move forward through the Business Roundtable letter and a couple of other things before the pandemic. But I think that whether it's the COVID crisis or Black Lives Matter or police-involved shootings or access to the office, working from home, all these different things have compelled companies, whether they're in the middle of those issues or at the peripheral side of those issues, to be more engaged with different voices. And I think that that's been a fairly swift change that was already underway, but it's, again, been accelerated over the course of 2020.
That's right. And I think that, what we're seeing as well is that, and you mentioned this a few times in this interview, is that there's a big bright light that's being shown on all of these areas now, and it's hard to ignore, right? In the past, maybe it was ignored, maybe it wasn't really addressed. Today, that light in the middle of this pandemic allows for us to truly try to begin to reimagine, to include that empathy piece, which is not exactly sympathy, sometimes confused as sympathy. So you've got all these areas that we can take as an opportunity to make the world better. And constantly, and everything I see coming out of the Nasdaq, you see this leadership, this setting the flag, where you can see the flag in the distance and you know where you're going. It's so important. It came up in an interview the other day, and I love the flag analogy because it's sort of like the golf analogy. You're trying to get to that flag. You can see it. Some days you really can't see it. Sometimes it's a dog leg and you can't see it at all, but you know it's there. And that's the critical piece, is that you know the flag is there and you got to get to it. If you don't have the flag, well, it's a much difficult road ahead. So that's what we're dealing with. But I'd like to shift again and ask you, Evan, what do you see as forever changed as a result of this global situation?
Some obvious things and maybe some not so obvious things. First of all, I do take your point and I agree with it that as much as we are being presented with evidence of a broken system, we think that there's opportunity for improvement. So when we look at the capital markets, when we look at our purpose campaign, for example, we're trying to expand access so that those voices have access to capital, have access to the entrepreneurship and job creation engine of starting and running a small business. So we treat that as an opportunity. We understand that some voices have been traditionally left out of that process, and what can we do to bring them into the process rather than wring our hands and talk about how it's not working for them. We want to try to create a solution. So I agree that it is an opportunity the crisis is painful for people, but it is creating opportunity in the business world to address those problems in a creative way. But what has changed? I mean, a number of things have changed. Labor dynamics have changed forever. I don't normally work here. I don't normally look like this. So labor dynamics have changed. I think that the way that we work with companies, the way that we are attached to companies has become more virtual. And so I think there are cultural pros and cons that come with that. I think that the way that we recruit talent, whether the person has to be in the headquarters location or not, or whether you find the right person for the job and they can essentially be virtual forever, that has changed. Companies are, I'm sure, reevaluating their real estate portfolios. Do we need an expensive Manhattan address for hundreds of people who are no longer coming into this building? Can we deliver our services? Some services that traditionally have required a human element at distance. Can we do that with tools and technologies? Can the technologies become safe enough, secure enough, fast enough to do everything that we want them to do and everything that we could normally count on a human being to do in the moment or in person? So those are the obvious changes. And I think all that stuff the rules have been rewritten a little bit, not just in terms of work from home, but how we cultivate labor as a productivity measure within companies and how we need to engage with labor. I think that, in addition to the human capital management side, companies taking more ownership of their employees' health and safety, the EHS aspect of this pandemic has been another new change. How responsible are companies for the medical care that their workers get, for the safety of their being as they are in an office or even at home? Make sure they have the right insurance, the right PPE, the right gear in order to deal with these problems while they work on behalf of the company. Where does the liability end? Where does the productivity help begin? So I think that has been a tremendous sea change that's happened with the way we understand and cultivate human talent and the ways that human talent are now supporting business goals essentially through a screen.
Incredibly well said, and just so insightful to see what is actually happening in your insights and perspectives, which are so unique coming out of the Nasdaq. And I'd like to close, Evan, with asking you, what is your post-summit ask for our global audience as we continue to change the world together?
I'll be short and sweet here. Get involved. Don't sit on the sidelines. There's room for everybody in this struggle. So if you're not measuring ESG and sustainability within your company or within your enterprise, start doing so. If you're not engaging with stakeholders who have an opinion about what you should be measuring or how, do so. If you're not reporting it publicly or to stakeholders that matter, your executive team, your investors, your potential employees, do so. Comment, participate in working groups. There's a million different working groups out there looking at environmental, social, and governance, looking at sustainability. Moody's, for example, has put out a request for comments on a new proposal that they have. Get involved, comment. Tell organizations what's working for you and what's not working for you. That'll only make the system better. I think that we're only going to create meaningful and measurable change if it is both grassroots, so working from the bottom up, and tone from the top down. So individual employees and smaller companies need to hear from their larger partners and from their bosses that this is not only tolerated, but it's accepted and expected, perhaps. And then from the bottom up, don't be afraid to be your authentic self at work. Bring your opinions and attitudes to work, not to be counterproductive, but actually try to be yourself and try to leverage those concerns that you have as a parent, as a worker, as a thinker, as a citizen. Bring those things to work and look at your business and look at the places that your business does business as an extension of your values and your ethics. And if you don't fit, then maybe you need to reevaluate that. And if you don't fit, maybe the company needs to reevaluate itself too. So keep that in mind.
Evan Harvey, Global Head of Sustainability at the Nasdaq. Thank you so very much for your insights. Thank you so much for your perspectives, and thank you so much for your global leadership as you change the world at the Nasdaq.
Thank you very much. It was a wonderful conversation. I was happy to be here.
And we'd like to ask our viewers any questions for more insights, for additional content and information from the Nasdaq, visit nasdaq.com, and of course, ideagenglobal.com. Thank you very much, Evan.
Thank you.